Real arguments often aren't just a simple application of a rule like modus ponens, modus tollens, or the disjunctive syllogism. We often have to take multiple steps, and each of those steps will reach some conclusion, which won't necessarily be the ultimate conclusion we're trying to reach. But if I can convince you of an intermediate conclusion, then I have more to work with, so I can use that intermediate conclusion as a premise in the next step of my argument, then convince you of something else, and then use that to convince you of something else, and so on. And hopefully I will eventually reach the conclusion I'm trying to reach, which in this argument is P. If I give an example of what this argument might say, it might be something like, I either like tea or coffee. If I like coffee, I'll buy coffee beans. I don't buy coffee beans, therefore I like tea. To prove that this argument form is valid, I could use a compound argument where I'm taking multiple steps to get to the conclusion. To write a valid compound argument, each of those steps has to be a valid argument form. And those will typically be the common argument forms like modus ponens, modus tollens, the disjunctive syllogism, and so on. If my first step is going to be one of those valid argument forms, then I'm probably looking for two premises that go together, two premises that use the same two variables. In this argument form, I can see I've got two premises here. Q implies R and not R, that only use two variables between them. And this is, if I like coffee, I will buy coffee beans. I don't buy coffee beans. And intuitively from this, I should be able to conclude, therefore, that I don't like coffee. I might also recognize that these are the two premises for a modus tollens argument, and not Q is indeed the conclusion of modus tollens in this case. So this step is actually a valid argument form because we can recognize that it's modus tollens. And now that I've convinced you of not Q, I can use not Q as a premise. There's another premise here that I haven't used yet, which is P or Q, and that seems to go with Q because it uses the same variable. So if I write P or Q, then I've used this premise as well. And intuitively from this, it says something like, I don't like coffee, I either like tea or coffee. Intuitively, I should be able to conclude, therefore, that I like tea. Or we might recognize that these are the two premises of a disjunctive syllogism, and this is indeed the conclusion that I would draw from the disjunctive syllogism. And finally, we've reached this conclusion, which is P, and that's the conclusion I was trying to reach. And let's think about why this argument form should convince you of P, why this compound argument should convince you that P is true, assuming you believe these premises. If you believe these three premises, then you at least believe the two that are underlined in red. If you believe those two, then you should believe not Q. Since you believe not Q, and you also believe this one that's underlined in blue, then you should believe P. Therefore, starting from these three premises, I've convinced you that you should believe P. And that means that therefore this whole argument is valid. This is what's called a compound argument.